Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. Today we're going to be talking a little bit about conversion. And the biggest thing to know and understand here is that there's really just a few metric prefixes you need to know. And once you know those prefixes, either making your units larger or smaller becomes pretty easy. So, first thing to know is that all of our prefixes have meaning. A kilo, for example, is 10 to the third power. What is 10 to the third power? That means 1,000 of something. Second thing to know is that in our measurements of metric, we always have a base unit. And believe it or not, but the base unit is actually 10 to the 0 power. And I don't know if you know this, but you will now, that anything raised to the 0 power is actually just 1. And that's a whole nother conversation about how we get to that. And perhaps I'll show you someday. And then our final two that we need to know are centi and milli. Okay? So a centi is 10 to the negative 2. And you might be like, negative 2? What is that? Well, it's actually, when you have something that's negative 2, we just put a little fancy 1 over top of it, and it becomes positive. It's 1 over 10 to the second, which is 1/100th. And it might look like that. Okay? And then finally, of course, we have milli, and milli is 10 to the negative third, which again is 1 over 10 to the positive third, which is 1 over 1,000, or 1,000th of something. Now, when you take all of these superscripts here, these powers, they're exponents, we just need to pay attention to these when we're converting from one unit to another. So for example, let's say we have something like 232 kilometers and we want to bring it to meters. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to say, I know what a kilo means. Kilo means 3. I know that this is a base unit, so it's 1, so we don't have to worry about it. Okay, so I'm just going to put the slash here. So that means that kilo is 1,000 times bigger than a meter. Now, I'm going to teach you a little trick. We all know the lovely alphabet. A, B, C, D. I'm going to carry on here and skip a bunch of letters, and I'm going to go to L. Now, what does L stand for? L stands for larger. Okay? And I'm going to keep going in the alphabet until I get to S. Okay? Now, what does S stand for? S stands for smaller. Why am I doing this, you ask? Well, it's quite simple. If you are moving from a larger to a smaller unit in the alphabet, L is to the left of S. So if I'm going from larger to smaller, I'm going to move right. And what am I going to move right? I'm going to move the decimal right. Now, if I'm going from a smaller unit to a larger, I'm going to move the decimal left. Now, take our example over here. We have a kilometer to a meter. A kilo is larger than a meter. Large to small. Large to small. So when I look over here, large to small, I move the decimal right. How many do I move it right? I move it 3. So I'm going to rewrite my number. Of course, here is my decimal place. And I'm going from larger to smaller. So I'm going to move it right. 1, 2, 3. Now I call these loop-de-loos. And every time I have a loop-de-loo, that means I'm going to have a 0. So 232 kilometers is equal to 232,000 meters. Now, let's say I'm going to have 7,123.4 milligrams. And I want to know what that is in kilograms. This is where I look again at my prefix chart. So I know that milli is a power of 3. It's to the negative third, but I know it is a power of 3. And kilo, of course, is 10 to the third, also a power of 3. So what do I do with these two numbers? Well, 3 plus 3 is 6. That means I'm going to move my decimal 6 places. Now, what direction am I going to use it? Milli is smaller than a kilo. So I look at my chart here, I'm going from smaller to larger. That means I'm moving it left. How many to the left? 6 places. So I rewrite my number, and I start moving. I do my loop-de-loops. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now this is where my decimal is. And recall that I'm going to fill in my loop-de-loops, but I need to also put a 0 in front of the decimal. So 7,123.4 milligrams is equal to 0.007123 kilograms. Now there's one warning to this, because it doesn't exactly work when you're going from a centimeter to a millimeter or vice versa. But the only thing you have to remember is that they are only 1 power of 10 away from each other. A centi is 10 times bigger than a milli, because this is 1/100th and this is 1,000th. So when it comes to centi and milli, you just need to remember they're 1 away, and then you can still go back to our larger and smaller rule. So if I have, and I'll do this up here so we can see it, if I have 72 millimeters and I want to go to centimeters, they're 1 away. A millimeter is smaller than a centimeter, so I'm going to move left. How many am I going to move left? 1. So I have my 72. I'm moving it 1 left, and 72 millimeters is equal to 7.2 centimeters. All right? So that's a quick little tutorial. When you are crossing over the base, all you have to do is acknowledge the prefixes and what their value is, add them up, and then decide if you're going from larger to smaller, in which you'll move the decimal right, or if you're going smaller to larger, in which case you move the decimal left. So if I was going from a kilometer to a centimeter, I would say this is 3, this is 2, 3 and 2 is 5. I'm going from larger to smaller. Larger to smaller means I would be moving the decimal right. Okay? And that's just a real quick lesson, and converting between our main metric prefixes, really the only ones that we use in our measurements, unless of course you're going to extremely microscopic and we start talking about things that are much, much smaller, like a micro or a nano, but for now we won't worry about that. Okay, good luck.